Whispers of a Different World. The morning air, still cool with the lingering breath of night, carried the scent of damp earth and the faint, sweet perfume of honeysuckle from the trellis. Sarah knelt among her rows of young lettuce, her bonnet's brim shading her eyes from the nascent sun. Her fingers, nimble and accustomed to the soil, gently plucked errant weeds, their roots surrendering with a soft, tearing sound. Each movement was precise, economical, a rhythm passed down through generations. Yet, beneath the outward calm, a quiet current of longing stirred within her, as persistent and subtle as the breeze rustling the corn tassels in the distance. She loved this garden, the vibrant green life she coaxed from the soil, the promise of sustenance it held. But lately, even the familiar comfort of her routine felt incomplete. Her gaze drifted past the neat rows of vegetables, over the rolling fields, and towards the distant line of trees where the English road snaked invisibly. A world lay beyond those trees, a world she only glimpsed in hushed conversations and the occasional passing automobile, a world that held untold wonders and anxieties, and a solitude she often felt even amidst her bustling family. Later, as twilight draped the farmhouse in shades of violet and gray, and the rhythmic creak of her father's rocking chair filled the main room, Sarah slipped away. The lantern she carried cast dancing shadows on the narrow stairs leading to her small attic room. It was a simple space, devoid of ornamentation, but in its starkness it held her most treasured secret. She knelt before a sturdy cedar chest at the foot of her bed. Its polished surface, smooth beneath her fingertips, hummed with a faint, woody aroma. With a soft click, she lifted the lid, revealing not quilts or linens, but a stack of envelopes tied with a length of faded blue ribbon. Her heart gave a small, familiar lurch. This was her true solace, a clandestine window to a different existence. Her fingers trembled slightly as she untied the ribbon, selecting the newest envelope, its paper thicker, more substantial than the others. The script was elegant, flowing, utterly unlike anything she encountered in the community's plain, practical correspondence. She held it to the lantern's soft glow, the words blurring slightly as her eyes devoured them. The world often feels like a vast, echoing chamber, doesn't it, S? A place where your deepest thoughts are mere whispers carried away by the wind, unheard, unacknowledged. But sometimes, just sometimes, you find a kindred spirit who hears those whispers, who understands the unspoken questions in your heart, and suddenly the chamber feels a little less empty. A sigh escaped her lips, a sound of profound relief and recognition. E understood. He always did. She remembered the first letter, nearly 6 months ago, tucked anonymously into the community's general mail slot at the market. It had been a simple query, asking about a local wildflower's name, but the phrasing, the underlying curiosity, had resonated with something deep inside her. She had replied, hesitantly, signing it simply S, and then another letter had arrived, and another, each one a thread weaving an invisible connection between her quiet world and E's. One letter had spoken of the melancholy beauty of autumn leaves, a feeling she had often experienced but never articulated. Each leaf, a tiny masterpiece, lives its fleeting life in vibrant glory before returning to the earth. A gentle reminder, perhaps, that even in letting go, there is a profound grace. She had pressed that letter to her chest, tears pricking her eyes. She had thought she was alone in seeing such poetry in the natural world. Another had described the liberating feeling of riding a bicycle through a bustling city, the wind in E's hair, the kaleidoscope of faces and sounds. It's a symphony of human endeavor, S, a testament to our relentless pursuit of connection, even in anonymity. The words painted vivid images in her mind, a world of speed and noise and vibrant color, so different from the slow, deliberate pace of her own life. It wasn't just the descriptions, but the feeling behind them, a sense of open possibility, of unburdened exploration. She had never shared these letters, not with her closest friend, not with her sister. This was hers, a private sanctuary. E never asked about her life in detail, nor did she press him for his. Their connection existed on a different plane, one of shared thoughts and feelings, a mutual recognition of the hidden depths within. Now, reading the newest letter, a warmth spread through her chest, chasing away the evening chill. E wrote of a book he had just finished, a story of a young woman who left her familiar world to seek a life of artistry and self-discovery. It made me wonder, S, about the quiet dreams we hold close, the ones we rarely speak aloud. Do you ever feel the pull of a different path, a whispered invitation to explore what lies beyond the known? Sarah's gaze drifted to the small, unadorned window. Beyond it, the vast, star-dusted sky stretched endlessly, a silent testament to the immensity of the universe. She did feel that pull, that whispered invitation, more intensely now than ever before. E's words were not just ink on paper. They were a gentle hand, reaching across an invisible divide, inviting her to peer a little closer into the unknown. And with each letter, the divide seemed to shrink, the unknown a little less daunting, and the whispers of that different world a little louder. The map and the meeting. The familiar cream envelope, delivered by the postman who always left it tucked under the milk pail, felt heavier than usual. Sarah's fingers, stained faintly green from shelling peas, trembled as she slit open the seal with a paring knife. Inside, nestled amongst E's usual elegant script, was not just another letter, but a folded piece of parchment. It was thicker, rougher to the touch than the writing paper she was accustomed to. Her eyes scanned E's neat handwriting first, a gasp catching in her throat as she read the last line. "I believe it is time our words found voices, Sarah. Meet me." Then she unfolded the parchment. It was a map, hand-drawn with meticulous detail. Not a map of a faraway land, but of the very woods surrounding her farm, a secret world she thought she knew intimately. The familiar curve of their lane was there, the sprawling oak at the edge of the east field, even the abandoned stone wall behind the cow pasture. A faint X marked a spot deep within the woods, by the bend in Willow Creek, where the old sycamore had split during the last storm. Below the X were 2 words, etched with a certainty that made her breath catch. Tomorrow, dusk. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her hands, usually so steady, shook uncontrollably, crinkling the map's edges. A meeting. After months of shared thoughts, of unspoken understanding woven into careful sentences, E wanted to meet. A rush of emotions, sharp and conflicting, swept through her. Terror at the transgression, a dizzying thrill of anticipation, and a deep, aching curiosity that refused to be silenced. She tucked the map and letter beneath a loose floorboard in her bedroom, a place only she knew. All afternoon, as she helped with the canning, the image of the X by the creek burned behind her eyelids. Her mother's cheerful chatter about the harvest faded into a drone. Her father's quiet command seemed distant. Every task felt imbued with a new weight, a secret pulsing beneath the mundane rhythm of farm life. The decision gnawed at her, a relentless current against a fragile dam. What if E was not what she imagined? What if he was old or cruel or worse, someone who would expose her? The fear of shame, of the community's judgment, was a cold knot in her stomach. But beneath that fear, a stronger, warmer current tugged. E understood her. He saw the world with the same wonder, questioned with the same quiet intensity. He offered a window to a world beyond the fenced fields, a world she yearned to glimpse. To ignore this invitation felt like a betrayal of her own deepest longings. By sundown, the dam cracked. The yearning won. She would go. The next day passed in a blur of nervous energy. She helped her mother churn butter, kneaded dough, and fed the chickens, all while her mind raced. How would she slip away unnoticed? What would she say? What would he look like? Her imagination painted 1,000 different faces, 1,000 different scenarios, each more vivid and terrifying and thrilling than the last. As dusk began to paint the sky in hues of lavender and bruised plum, a familiar knot of apprehension tightened in her chest. She changed into her plainest dress, pulled her bonnet low, and told her mother she was going to check on the newborn calf in the south pasture. Her voice, she noted with a pang of guilt, sounded steadier than her heart felt. The air was cool and damp as she slipped out of the barn and headed not south, but east, towards the woods. The familiar path, usually a comforting friend, now felt like a forbidden tunnel. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt through her. Her breath hitched in her throat, a frantic tempo mimicking the beat of her own pulse. The scent of pine needles and damp earth filled her nostrils, grounding her slightly even as her mind spun. The trees grew denser, their branches interlacing overhead, creating a dim, hushed world. She followed the subtle undulations of the map in her mind, past the gnarled roots of the ancient oak, then deeper, where the sunlight barely penetrated. The sound of the creek, a gentle murmur she knew well, grew louder, pulling her forward. Her boots crunched on fallen leaves, a sound that seemed deafening in the stillness. A nervous shiver ran down her spine, but she kept moving, drawn by an irresistible force. The sycamore, split down the middle by a lightning strike years ago, loomed into view, its stark, pale wood a beacon in the twilight. And there, standing by the creek, his back to her, was a figure, tall, broad-shouldered. He was looking out at the water, utterly still. Sarah stopped, hidden by a thicket of blackberry bushes, her heart pounding a furious rhythm against her ribs. The moment was here, the unknown, the beginning. She took a deep, shuddering breath and stepped out from the shadows. Ethan, by the creek. Sarah approached the sycamore, her heart thrumming a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and late-blooming honeysuckle, seemed to vibrate with anticipation. She peered through the deepening twilight, her gaze sweeping the gnarled trunk and the surrounding undergrowth. There was no one. A pang of disappointment, sharp and unexpected, twisted in her gut. Had she misunderstood? Had he changed his mind? Then she saw him, not standing but seated on a fallen log, his back to her, a sketchbook propped on his knees. His head was bowed, intent on his work, a lock of dark hair falling across his brow. Even from this distance, she could discern the careful, deliberate strokes of his pencil. He was sketching the creek, the way the last rays of sunlight fractured on the water's surface, the intricate dance of shadows under the willows. It was a scene she had gazed upon countless times, but through his eyes she knew it would reveal a hidden beauty. A sudden, dizzying realization hit her. The way he held his pencil, the quiet intensity, the subject matter itself, it was all so familiar, so Her breath hitched. She had imagined so many faces, so many scenarios for this meeting, but never this. This man, an English man, sketching by the creek, was her anonymous correspondent. She took a hesitant step forward, a twig snapping under her boot. He started, his head snapping up. For a moment their eyes met across the fading light. His were a startling shade of green, wide with surprise, then softening with recognition. A faint blush crept up his neck, mirroring the heat she felt rising in her own cheeks. He rose, pushing the sketchbook into a canvas bag slung over his shoulder. "Sarah," he said, his voice a low, melodic baritone, exactly as she had imagined it. "Ethan," she replied, the name feeling foreign on her tongue, yet strangely right. You're Ethan Miller." He offered a sheepish grin. "The one and only, unless you know another Englishman who spends his evenings lurking by Willow Creek with a sketchbook." A small, genuine laugh escaped her, easing some of the tension that had tightened her chest. "I didn't expect you." "And I dare say you weren't expecting me," he countered, gesturing vaguely to himself. "Not exactly the image one conjures when corresponding with a fellow artist, is it?" She shook her head, a smile playing on her lips. "No, not exactly." They stood for a moment longer, a comfortable silence settling between them, a testament to the months of shared thoughts that transcended their initial shock. Then, as if on cue, they both moved towards the fallen log, sitting down a respectful distance apart. "So," Sarah began, her gaze drifting to the creek. "You sketch." "Among other things," Ethan replied, picking up a smooth, flat stone and skipping it across the water. "It's a way to capture the fleeting, the beauty that's often overlooked." "I know that feeling," she said softly, thinking of her own hidden drawings. "Your letters, they made me see things differently, even things I've looked at my whole life." He turned to her, his green eyes luminous in the fading light. "And yours, Sarah, they opened up a world I didn't know existed, a world of quiet strength and profound observation." They talked then, the initial awkwardness melting away like frost in the morning sun. Hours bled into one another as dusk gave way to a star-dusted night. They spoke of the changing seasons, the patterns of migratory birds, the solitary joy of creation. Ethan described the intricacies of his grandfather's woodworking shop, the scent of sawdust and fresh-cut pine. Sarah shared tales of the harvest, the camaraderie of quilting bees, the rhythm of life on the farm. She found herself telling him about her grandmother's stories, the ones whispered late at night, filled with ancient wisdom and forgotten lore. He listened intently, never interrupting, his gaze fixed on her face, making her feel seen in a way she rarely was. There was an understanding in his eyes, a depth that mirrored her own quiet longing. She learned he was a scholar of sorts, devouring books with an insatiable hunger, much like she did in secret. He spoke of faraway lands, of different cultures, of ideas that sparked a familiar flicker of wonder within her. "I always knew there was more out there," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess them. "Beyond the fences, beyond the familiar fields." Ethan nodded, his expression serious. "And now you know, Sarah, there is." The moon, a slender crescent, began its slow ascent, casting long, silvery shadows across the creek. A hoot owl called from the depths of the woods, a lonely, evocative sound. Neither of them moved, caught in the magic of their shared discovery. The world, for this moment, had shrunk to the two of them, nestled by the creek, finally connected not just by ink and paper, but by presence, by voice, by the undeniable current of their shared souls. A bridge between worlds. The scent of damp earth and blooming wild mint became the signature of their clandestine world. Days blurred into weeks, each marked by the thrill of a shared secret and the quiet anticipation of their next meeting by Willow Creek. Sarah found herself weaving excuses with an ease that both surprised and troubled her. A prolonged walk to collect berries, a sudden inspiration to sketch a particular stand of oak, each fabrication a delicate thread pulling her further from the familiar tapestry of her life. Ethan was always there, a steady presence amidst the rustling leaves and gurgling water. He taught her the names of wildflowers she'd seen countless times but never truly known, pointing out the delicate veins of a trillium petal or the vibrant blush on a cardinal flower. He'd bring her small, smooth stones he'd found, polished by the creek's relentless flow, which she would tuck into her apron pocket like precious jewels. Their conversations flowed effortlessly, a continuation of their letters, yet enriched by the warmth of his presence, the subtle inflections in his voice, the way his eyes would crinkle at the corners when she shared a particularly vivid dream. One sun-dappled afternoon, as dragonflies darted over the water's surface, Sarah recounted a recent quilting bee. She described the meticulous stitching, the hushed gossip, the pervasive scent of beeswax and starch. Ethan listened, truly listened, his gaze fixed on her. "It sounds communal," he mused, sketching idly in his notebook. "Like everyone contributes to one large, beautiful thing." Sarah nodded. "It is, and when it's finished, it's a comfort, a warmth for someone's bed." "Do you ever feel like your own stitches are different?" he asked softly, not looking up from his paper. A shiver traced its way down her spine. He always seemed to know. "Sometimes," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper, "like they don't quite fit the pattern." He finally met her gaze, his eyes reflecting the deep greens of the surrounding woods. "Perhaps you're meant to start a new pattern." The idea, bold and frightening, settled in her heart. She often thought of her life as two distinct streams now, flowing parallel yet never quite merging. One was the steady, predictable current of her Amish duties, the milking before dawn, the churn of butter, the hymns sung in unison, the familiar rhythm of community life. The other was this secret tributary, wild and exhilarating, fed by Ethan's companionship and the boundless questions he encouraged her to ask. As their bond deepened, so did the ache in her chest. The easy laughter she shared with Ethan would often be followed by a pang of guilt, a sharp reminder of the deceit she was perpetrating. Her mother's gentle admonitions about obedience, her father's quiet trust. These things, once comforting anchors, now felt like heavy chains. She found herself drifting during sermons, her mind replaying a shared glance, a whispered word, the comforting weight of Ethan's hand accidentally brushing hers as they reached for a fallen leaf. The world of her plain buggy and bonnet felt increasingly distant from the world where she could speak her mind freely, where her artistic spirit wasn't just tolerated, but celebrated. One afternoon, the light filtering through the canopy painted shifting patterns on the creek bank. Sarah sat on a smooth stone, watching the water ripple over pebbles, lost in thought. She was contemplating the upcoming harvest, the long days of communal labor, and the looming expectations of courtship. The idea of Jacob Yoder, a good, steady man from their district, suddenly felt impossibly foreign, like a character from a book she hadn't read. Ethan, ever observant, had been sketching her for some time. He worked with a quiet intensity, his brow furrowed in concentration. The soft scratch of his charcoal on paper was the only sound besides the creek. When he finally held it out to her, her breath hitched. It was her, undeniably, but a Sarah she rarely saw in the small mirror above her wash basin. He had captured the contemplative curve of her mouth, the slight furrow between her brows, the way her gaze seemed to hold a world of unspoken thoughts. But more than that, he'd imbued her with a profound sense of wistfulness, a yearning she recognized instantly as her own. "It's beautiful," she murmured, tracing the lines of her own face with a trembling finger. "It's you," Ethan corrected, his voice gentle. "The you that wonders, the you that dreams beyond the fence." His words were a bridge, spanning the vast chasm between her two worlds, yet in that moment she felt more torn than ever. The beauty of the drawing, the truth it revealed, was also a painful reminder of the growing chasm within her own heart. How long could she keep walking this tightrope, suspended between duty and desire, between who she was expected to be and who she was becoming? The creek flowed on, indifferent to her turmoil, carrying leaves and debris downstream, a constant reminder of time's relentless march. Hannah's glimpse. The late afternoon sun dappled through the willow branches, painting shifting patterns on the creek path as Sarah hurried home. Her heart still thrummed with the afterglow of Ethan's presence, and the unsettling, yet exhilarating image he'd drawn of her true self seemed etched onto her very being. The creek's murmur faded behind her, replaced by the rustle of dry leaves and the distant bleating of lambs. She adjusted her bonnet, a sense of urgency pressing in, a familiar fear of discovery tightening her chest. Just as the path curved, opening onto the pasture bordering their farm, a flash of red caught her eye. Hannah, her younger sister, was crouched by the old oak, meticulously arranging a collection of smooth gray stones into a miniature fence for an imaginary flock of sheep. Her bright red bonnet bobbed with concentration, and a smudge of dirt adorned her cheek. Sarah froze, a jolt of panic shooting through her. Hannah, ever observant, looked up, her wide, curious eyes latching onto Sarah. "Sarah, where were you?" Hannah's voice, clear and bright like a robin's song, carried easily across the short distance. She scrambled to her feet, abandoning her stone project, and skipped towards Sarah, a twig clutched in her hand like a shepherd's crook. Sarah's breath hitched. She could feel the lingering flush on her cheeks, the slight disarray of her hair beneath her bonnet, the way her shawl felt just a little askew. "Just walking," she managed, trying to sound casual, though her voice felt thin and reedy. Hannah stopped a few feet away, her head tilted. "You look funny." She squinted, her gaze unwavering. "Like you ran all the way from the market. Is something wrong?" Sarah swallowed, her palms growing damp. Hannah rarely missed a detail. "No, nothing is wrong, Hannah. I was just enjoying the quiet." She forced a smile, hoping it didn't look as strained as it felt. "Why aren't you helping Mama with supper?" Hannah shrugged, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Mama said I could play a little longer, but you were gone a long time. Papa was asking for you, to help with the milking." A fresh wave of unease washed over Sarah. Papa. She had completely lost track of time with Ethan. "Oh dear, I must have been wool gathering. I'll go straight to the barn." She started to move past Hannah, eager to escape the probing questions. But Hannah, persistent as a burr, matched her pace. "Your cheeks are so red. Is it hot by the creek?" "It was warm," Sarah stammered, picking up her pace. The air suddenly felt thick, stifling. The innocent questions felt like accusations, each one a tiny pinprick of fear. She imagined Hannah recounting the encounter to Mama, to Papa, the details scrutinized, her vague answers picked apart. The secret, so precious and fragile, suddenly felt precariously close to shattering. She spent the remainder of the evening in a haze, the scent of fresh milk in the barn, the rhythmic clang of pots in the kitchen, all a blur. Hannah's curious gaze followed her, a silent reminder of her near miss. That night, tucked into her bed, the image of Hannah's questioning face lingered, an unwelcome shadow on the vivid memory of Ethan's understanding eyes. The next morning, with the first hint of dawn painting the sky in soft hues of rose and gray, Sarah penned a hasty, worried note to Ethan. She tucked it into the hollow of the old oak, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Ethan, I must be more careful. Hannah saw me yesterday returning from the path. She asked questions, innocent questions, but they felt like sharp needles. She noticed my appearance, the flush on my face. She said I looked funny. My absence from the farm was noted. We cannot be so careless with our time. I fear discovery more than ever. We must find a way to be more discreet, to meet when no one would possibly notice my absence. I feel a chill of dread. Please, let us think of something. Sarah." She pressed the note deep into the bark, hoping it would convey the urgency she felt, the sudden, terrifying proximity of exposure. The quiet rustle of the leaves felt like whispers, and every distant sound from the farmhouse made her jump. Hannah's glimpse had made their carefully constructed world feel terribly fragile, a glass vessel teetering on the edge of a precipice. The watchful eyes of Mrs. Zook. The rocking chair on Mrs. Zook's porch was a fixture, as permanent as the oak tree in her front yard. From its worn slats, she surveyed the comings and goings of the Stoltzfus farm across the lane, her gaze as sharp and unblinking as a hawk's. Lately, Sarah's patterns had begun to fray at the edges, a thread out of place in the otherwise tightly woven fabric of daily life. Mrs. Zook noticed the moments Sarah wasn't where she ought to be, not in the garden at dusk, not in the barn at dawn, not scrubbing the milk pails when the sun was high. She catalogued these absences, tucked them away like dried herbs in an apothecary jar, waiting for the right moment to brew. One Tuesday afternoon, while Mrs. Zook was pegging out laundry, the crisp snap of sheets on the line punctuated her thoughts. Sarah had just returned, dusting straw from her skirt, a faint blush still lingering on her cheeks. Mrs. Zook's eyes narrowed. Straw didn't cling like that from the chicken coop, nor did a blush bloom from a simple errand to the market. She hummed a tuneless melody, the sound thin and reedy in the afternoon quiet, a silent question mark hanging in the air between their two farms. The community gathering at the miller's barn felt warm and close, smelling of fresh-baked bread and simmering stew. Children darted between adults, their laughter bright against the drone of conversation. Sarah, trying to blend into the background near the pie table, felt a prickle on the back of her neck. She knew, without looking, that Mrs. Zook was watching her. "Sarah, child, you're looking well-rested these days," Mrs. Zook said, appearing suddenly at her elbow, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. Her voice was sweet, almost cloying. "Not like you've been up at dawn with the milking, eh? Your mama must be grateful for the extra help you're offering elsewhere." Sarah's breath hitched. She could feel the subtle shift in the air, the way a few heads turned, a ripple of quiet curiosity spreading through the cluster of women. "I help where I'm needed, Mrs. Zook," Sarah managed, her voice a little too high. She gripped the edge of the pie table, her knuckles white. "Of course, dear, of course," Mrs. Zook purred, her eyes, the color of faded denim, lingering on Sarah's face. Such a busy young woman. So many interests. She moved on then, leaving Sarah feeling exposed, as if a spotlight had suddenly found her in the dim barn. The easy camaraderie of the gathering now felt like 1,000 tiny needles pricking her skin. She longed for the solitude of her room, for the quiet reassurance of Ethan's letters. Later that week, beneath the ancient willow tree by the creek, the same place where Ethan had sketched her, Sarah recounted the encounter. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and budding leaves, a stark contrast to the tightening knot in her stomach. "She knows something, Ethan," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the rustle of the leaves. "She doesn't know what, but she suspects. The way she looked at me, the things she said at the gathering, it was like she was shining a lantern on me for everyone to see." Ethan listened, his brow furrowed, his gaze sweeping the tree line as if searching for an unseen threat. He took her hand, his thumb tracing worried circles on her skin. "We need to be more careful, Sarah. Your note was right. This is getting risky." "Risky doesn't even begin to cover it," Sarah said, pulling her hand away to gesture helplessly. "It's terrifying. I feel like every move I make is being watched, like I'm walking on a tightrope over a bonfire." She shivered, despite the mild spring air. "If my parents found out, if the community found out—" She couldn't even finish the thought. The consequences were a chasm she dared not look into for too long. Ethan nodded slowly. "I understand. We need to think. Maybe we space out our meetings even more, or find new places less obvious." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a concern that mirrored her own. "I don't want to put you in danger, Sarah, not for anything." "But the letters?" Sarah asked, her voice small. The letters were their lifeline, the thread that connected them, the only way she truly felt seen. Ethan squeezed her hand again. "The letters are safe. They're our secret, sealed. It's the meeting, the physical presence that's drawing attention." He paused, weighing his words. "We can't stop, Sarah. Not now. We just need to be smarter, more discreet." A gust of wind rustled through the willow, scattering a shower of yellow-green buds onto the creek. Sarah looked at Ethan, at the earnestness in his eyes, and a fragile hope bloomed amidst her fear. He was right. They couldn't stop. The connection they shared was too precious, too vital to be extinguished by the watchful eyes of Mrs. Zook or anyone else. But the shadow of exposure now loomed larger, more tangible than ever before, a constant, chilling presence at the edges of her awareness. A confession by the water. The late afternoon sun, already softening towards evening, dappled through the sycamore leaves that overhung the creek. The air, usually a balm, felt heavy around Sarah as she sat on a smooth, moss-covered stone, her gaze fixed on the water's slow current. Ethan sat beside her, closer than they usually dared in the open air, his presence a warm anchor against the chill that had settled in her chest since Mrs. Zook's words. "I keep seeing her face," Sarah began, her voice barely a whisper. "That look she gave me, like she knew, like she could see right through me." She clasped her hands tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. "It's not just her, Ethan. It's the way my dad has been looking at me too, asking about my errands, where I've been. He never used to scrutinize me so much." Ethan reached out, his fingers brushing the back of her hand, a small, reassuring gesture that didn't quite calm the tremor running through her. "They're concerned, Sarah. That's natural. Your family loves you." "That's what makes it so much worse," she countered, finally looking at him, her eyes clouded with unshed tears. "My family. They are everything to me. My ma'am, dad, my brothers and sisters. Their faith, their life. It's all I've ever known. The thought of bringing shame upon them, of being the cause of gossip and whispers in the community. It's like a knot in my stomach that won't loosen." A tear finally escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. "I don't know how I could bear it, Ethan. To see their disappointment, to know I've broken their trust." The sound of the water, usually so soothing, now seemed to mock her, a constant reminder of the hidden depths of her own life. She thought of her mother's gentle smile, her father's steady hand, the innocent chatter of her younger siblings. All of it felt precariously balanced, ready to topple with one wrong step, one exposed secret. Ethan shifted closer, his arm gently circling her shoulders, a silent offer of comfort. "I understand, Sarah, more than you know. This isn't just about us, is it? It's about your whole world, and I wouldn't ask you to choose between that and us." His voice was low, laced with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "But I also know that what we share, this connection, it's real, it's important, and it's not something to be ashamed of." She leaned into his embrace, finding a fragile solace in his warmth. "It feels right when I'm with you, or when I read your letters, like I'm finally myself, the one I am inside. But then I go home, and I see the familiar patterns, the expectations, and the weight of it all crashes down again. What if they find out, Ethan? What if someone sees us? What then?" Her voice cracked with the raw edge of her fear. "They would be heartbroken. They would think I had betrayed everything they taught me, everything they believe in." He pulled her a little tighter. "We have to be more careful, Sarah, even more so. But running away from this, from each other, is that really the answer? Would you be truly happy, pretending it never happened?" Sarah was silent, staring at the swirling water. The image of a life without Ethan, without their letters, without the shared understanding that had become so vital, felt like a return to a muted, colorless existence. The thought alone was a dull ache in her soul. She knew she couldn't go back to being just the dutiful farm girl, not entirely. Ethan had awakened something in her, a thirst for more, a desire to explore the landscapes of her own mind and heart. "No," she finally whispered, the word barely audible. "I don't think I could. But I also don't know how much longer we can keep this hidden. The walls are closing in, Ethan. I can feel it." Ethan sighed, a deep, resonant sound. "I feel it too. This cannot last forever, Sarah. We both know that. But for now, we find a way. We communicate, we meet when we can, and we hold on to what we have. And we think. We think about what comes next, even if it's terrifying." He squeezed her shoulder. "Whatever path you choose, Sarah, know that I will support you, even if that path leads away from me." His words, meant to be comforting, only underscored the immense chasm that lay before them. The creek flowed on, indifferent to their silent struggle, carrying its secrets downstream. Sarah knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that their time was running out. The confession had been made, the fears laid bare. Now, they were left with the daunting task of navigating the treacherous waters ahead. Summoned by the bishop. The late afternoon sun, usually a comforting presence, felt like an interrogation lamp as it streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating every speck of dust dancing in the air. Sarah was kneading dough, the rhythmic push and pull a meager anchor against the rising tide of her anxiety. Her mother, humming a hymn, seemed oblivious to the quiet storm brewing within Sarah. Then, a rap at the door, 3 deliberate knuckles against the worn wood. Sarah's heart lurched. She knew that knock. It was the same measured cadence Bishop Fisher used when he had something important to say, a summons that rarely brought good news. Her mother wiped her hands on her apron and went to answer. Sister Stoltzfus, Bishop Fisher's voice, usually a warm rumble, held a gravelly edge today. May I have a word with Sarah? Sarah froze, her hands still buried in the floury dough. Her mother glanced back, a flicker of surprise, then concern, clouding her features. She nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. Bishop Fisher stepped into the entryway, his tall frame filling the space, casting a long shadow across the polished linoleum. His gaze, usually kind and twinkling, was serious, unwavering. Sarah, he said, his voice softer now, but no less impactful. Would you walk with me to my home? There are matters we need to discuss. The invitation was a command. Sarah's hands trembled as she pulled them from the dough. She wiped them quickly on a tea towel, her mind racing, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her mother offered a small, sympathetic nod, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken gravity of the moment. Sarah slipped on her bonnet, the familiar ties feeling like a noose, and followed the bishop out into the crisp autumn air. The walk was silent, each crunch of their shoes on the gravel path a thunderclap in Sarah's ears. The vibrant hues of the turning leaves blurred into an indistinct wash of color. Every rustle of dry cornstalks, every distant low of a cow, seemed to mock her with its normalcy. She knew. She didn't know how, but he knew. Mrs. Zook's knowing glances, her father's quiet intensity, it had all culminated in this. Bishop Fisher's home was a replica of her own, yet today it felt imposing, a place of judgment. He led her into his study, a small, sparsely furnished room dominated by a sturdy oak desk piled with ledgers and a well-worn Bible. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and beeswax. He gestured to a straight-backed chair, then settled into his own behind the desk. Sarah, he began, his voice slow and deliberate. Rumors have a way of finding their way to a bishop's ears. Like seeds carried on the wind, they can take root in unexpected places. He paused, his gaze fixed on her. I have heard of a young woman, a member of our community, who has been straying from the path. A young woman who has been corresponding with an outsider, meeting with him even. His words, though gentle, were a hammer blow. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her skin clammy and cold. Her throat tightened, making it impossible to speak. The shame, a scorching wave, washed over her, hotter than any summer sun. Is this true, Sarah? He asked, his voice softening further, a note of deep sorrow intermingling with his firmness. Have you been writing letters to an Englishman? Meeting with him in secret? The question hung in the air, heavy and inescapable. Sarah's gaze dropped to her clasped hands, her knuckles white. She swallowed, a dry, painful effort. The image of Ethan's kind eyes, his understanding smile, flashed before her, a stark contrast to the stern reality of her present. She couldn't lie, not to Bishop Fisher, not when his gaze seemed to penetrate her very soul. Yes, Bishop Fisher, she whispered, the words barely audible, a ragged breath escaping her lips. It is true. Each word was a splinter, tearing at her composure. I have been corresponding with him, and we have met. A profound sigh escaped Bishop Fisher, a sound of deep weariness. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes closing for a brief moment, as if to absorb the full weight of her confession. When he opened them again, the sorrow was more pronounced, etched around his eyes. Sarah, he said, his voice low, do you understand the gravity of your actions? The Ordnung, the very fabric of our community, is built on trust, on adherence to our ways. To correspond with an outsider, to meet with him in secret, this is a grievous transgression. He paused, his gaze softening, searching her face. Why, child? What led you down this path? Sarah looked up, tears stinging her eyes. The shame was still there, a burning ember, but beneath it, a desperate need for understanding flickered. I felt lost, Bishop Fisher, she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. I had questions, thoughts I couldn't share, and he He understood. He didn't judge. She choked back a sob. I know it was wrong. I know I've broken trust. I never meant to cause trouble. Bishop Fisher listened, his expression unreadable, a blend of disappointment and profound empathy. He steepled his fingers, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond her. The silence stretched, filled only with the frantic beating of Sarah's heart. She knew her future in the community, her standing with her family, hung precariously in that quiet room, balanced on the bishop's next words. The weight of her choices, of her forbidden love, pressed down on her, an unbearable burden. Before the community, the meeting house offered no refuge from the cold, even with the midday sun slicing through its unadorned windows. Dust motes danced in the bright shafts, illuminating the strained visages of the assembled community. They occupied wooden benches, arranged in starkly segregated rows, men to one side, women to the other, a division that felt acutely emphasized today. A profound quiet, heavy with unspoken censure and fretful anticipation, pressed down on Sarah. She stood at the front, near the pulpit, each gaze a palpable prod against her skin. Her family, in the foremost row, bore expressions blending sorrow and stoicism. Her mother's knuckles gleamed white as she gripped her father's arm. Hannah, usually a vibrant presence, was unnaturally pale, her eyes fixed on the scuffed floorboards. Bishop Fisher, positioned behind a simple table, cleared his throat, the sound resonating in the hushed space. "Brothers and sisters," he began, his voice a low rumble, "we convene today to address a matter of deviation from our Ordnung. Sarah Stoltzfus has requested to speak before you, to open her heart." He acknowledged Sarah with a grave nod. Sarah's breath hitched. Her palms were slick with perspiration, and a tremor ran through her knees. She clutched her apron's familiar cotton, finding little solace. Lifting her chin, she met the sea of somber faces. Her gaze swept over them, past Mrs. Zook's pursed lips, the wary eyes of young Jacob Miller, the sympathetic yet downcast glance of old Mr. Hostetler. She found Hannah's wide, searching eyes and drew a shaky breath. I know what I have done," Sarah began, her voice a reedy whisper at first, then gaining strength as she pushed past the obstruction in her throat. "I know I have broken our rules. I corresponded with an Englishman, and I met with him." A collective gasp rippled through the women's side. A few men shifted uneasily. "I was lonely," she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. "I felt invisible. I harbored thoughts, questions, dreams that I felt I couldn't share with anyone here." Her gaze drifted toward the window, to the distant fields, the world beyond their fences. "He understood me. He listened. In his letters I found a kindred spirit, someone who saw past my silence, who nurtured my curiosities." She paused, taking another fortifying breath. "And then we met, and I fell in love with him." The words, spoken aloud, hung in the air, a scandalous declaration in their quiet world. A murmur, like a disturbed hive, rose from the women. Mrs. Zook let out a small, scandalized cluck, her hand flying to her mouth. "He is kind," Sarah continued, her voice now steady, imbued with a quiet defiance. "He is gentle. He sees the world with wonder, as I do. He makes me feel brave. He makes me feel like myself, but more." Her eyes welled, but she blinked back the tears, refusing to falter. "I know this is not our way. I know I have brought shame upon my family and our community, and I am truly sorry for the pain I have caused." She paused, letting her words settle. "But I cannot say I regret finding him. I cannot say I regret the feelings that have grown in my heart, because they are real, and they are a part of me now." A profound stillness followed her confession, broken only by the rustle of clothing and an occasional sniffle. The community members exchanged glances, their faces a tableau of shock, disapproval, and a flicker of something akin to pity. Hannah, however, was no longer looking at the floor. Her head was up, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. She looked from Sarah to the elders, her brow furrowed in a silent question. Her young mind, still grappling with the rigid boundaries of their world, struggled with the raw honesty of her sister's words. Bishop Fisher cleared his throat again, his gaze unwavering on Sarah. "Thank you, Sarah," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle yet firm. "You have spoken your truth. The community has heard you." He looked out at the assembled members. "Now, we must consider this truth and the path forward." His gaze swept over the rows, lingering for a moment on the Zooks, then on the Stoltzfus family. The weight of their collective judgment, the unyielding power of their tradition, settled in the air, thick and suffocating. Sarah stood, exposed, awaiting her fate, a fragile bloom in a field of stone. A new path. The heavy quiet of the meeting house had been a physical presence, dense and stifling. Sarah, her pulse hammering an erratic beat, had met Bishop Fisher's gaze, usually so kind, now searching her face. He'd granted her a reprieve, a week to seek guidance, to reflect, to choose. Now, that grace period was over. She sat opposite Bishop Levi Fisher in his modest study, an aroma of seasoned wood and beeswax permeating the air. Sunlight, fractured by a simple curtain, illuminated a silent ballet of dust motes. Her hands, clasped tightly in her lap, felt like ice. Bishop Fisher, a familiar weariness etched around his eyes, regarded her with a blend of sorrow and understanding. "Sarah," he began, his voice a soft inquiry, "have you truly considered the inclination of your heart, the path that honors both divine will and our fellowship?" Sarah drew a fortifying breath, the echo of last week's confession still a raw ache. "Bishop," she replied, her voice steadier than anticipated, "I have prayed, I have pondered, and I have found a path that, I believe, honors the truth within me." She met his eyes directly. "I cannot deny my feelings for Ethan. They are genuine, and I cannot pretend they do not exist." Bishop Fisher nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "And you comprehend the ramifications of such a choice, my child, the severance it brings from everything you have ever known." A sharp, immediate pang of desolation pierced her. She pictured her mother's gentle hum in the kitchen, her father's steadfast quietude, the comforting cadence of the farm's seasons. Yet, then came the thought of Ethan's letters, his insightful words, the way his hand in hers felt like a secure anchor in a world suddenly vast and uncertain. "I understand," she affirmed, her voice gaining resolve. "It is a profound decision, Bishop, but to suppress this bond, to live a life in disguise, that would be a different kind of fracture, a breaking of my own spirit." She paused, then added, "My heritage will always reside within me. I will always revere the faith that nurtured me. But I must forge my own identity, beyond these boundaries." A long silence settled between them, broken only by the distant cry of a crow. Bishop Fisher finally exhaled, a sound heavy with resignation. "Then you have chosen to step beyond the Ordnung, Sarah. This signifies formal separation. You will no longer be a part of our community." His voice, though mournful, held no trace of malice. "But grasp this, child. The Lord's affection transcends any barrier we construct, and my prayers will accompany you." Tears blurred Sarah's vision, a complex mix of grief and liberation. She had braced for condemnation, harsh words, perhaps even wrath. Instead, she encountered a solemn acceptance. "Thank you, Bishop," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for your discernment." Later that afternoon, Sarah stood by the old maple at the edge of Miller's property, the late autumn wind rustling through its skeletal branches. Ethan emerged from the workshop, his figure silhouetted against the sinking sun. He advanced towards her, his familiar, reassuring gait instantly quieting her tumultuous heart. "Sarah," he murmured as he reached her, his eyes probing hers for a reply. She didn't need to speak. Her expression, the slight tremor in her hands as she reached for his, conveyed everything. He took her hands, his touch warm and steady. "You chose," he breathed, a mixture of awe and relief in his tone. "I chose us," she confirmed, a small, defiant smile touching her lips. "I chose a new horizon." He drew her into a soft embrace, holding her close, and for a moment, the immense weight of the world dissipated. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice muffled against her hair. "We make arrangements," she said, pulling back slightly to meet his gaze. "Grand arrangements. We'll find a place, not too distant, but far enough. A place where I can cultivate tomatoes and you can paint your vistas. A place where we can simply be ourselves." Ethan's smile widened, radiating pure exhilaration. "I know just the ideal spot. There's an old farmhouse, a bit rough around the edges, but structurally sound, about 20 minutes from here. It boasts a sizable garden plot and a studio space above the barn. I've driven past it countless times, always thinking—" He trailed off, his eyes bright with impending possibility. "Thinking what?" Sarah prompted, her heart soaring with nascent hope. "Thinking it was a setting for a future. Our future." The next morning the air was crisp and luminous, carrying the scent of moist earth and wood smoke. A small buggy, borrowed from a compassionate neighbor rather than her family's, waited by the lane. Her possessions were few: a worn wooden chest containing Ethan's letters, a few beloved books, and the simple clothes she wore. Her family had offered their farewells in the pre-dawn quiet, their faces etched with pain and affection. Her mother had hugged her tightly, whispering, "Be happy, Liebe." Her father, usually reserved, had squeezed her hand, his eyes glistening. Ethan stood beside the buggy, a steadfast presence. He made no attempt to hasten her, understanding the profound weight of the moment. Sarah turned back, her gaze sweeping over the familiar farmhouse, the barn, the field stretching to the horizon. She saw her life, her history, her origins. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, a farewell to a world she was relinquishing. Then she faced forward, towards Ethan, towards the open road. The sun was ascending, painting the sky in fiery oranges and golds. It was a new dawn, a nascent journey. She climbed into the buggy, Ethan beside her, and with a gentle cluck they departed. The rhythmic clip-clop of the horses' hooves provided a steady pulse, carrying them away from the known, into the promising, exhilarating unknown. Sarah reached for Ethan's hand, lacing her fingers through his, and squeezed. He squeezed back, a silent pledge of the future they would construct, together.